That's correct. It's going to be on my YouTube channel. Greg's going to make a playlist on there for the people that can't come, and so if you do miss, we've got it. Can you see if I think I'm in the... I think it's good. Tom, just check and see if I'm in the square. So, here's how this is going to be different than perfect. Thank you. So, this is the way it's going to be different than most tourist groups. Most tourist groups, they get a book. The bus driver tells them something a little bit before they get there. Or not the bus driver, but the tour guide on the bus. And then you go and you go, wow, that's cool, and then you forget, and you go, where was I? How? What? Now, what was significant about this site? So what we're doing is we're going to take time over the next 3-4 months where we're going to visit each site. I'm going to try and help you with a little memory thing. There's going to be this material online, and I've given you, handed out some things, so that when you get to these places, you go, oh, I remember, this is where, so you're going to be ready. You may still have your book and you want to go through and review, but things are so fast. When you get into Jerusalem, you're going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You're going to the pools of Bethsaida. You're going to here. It moves. And if you're like, let's see, now why was this important? And so I want you almost to have that memorized as much as possible. And there will be a test, and if you can't pass the test, you don't get on the... Just kidding, I'd flunk it. So, anyway, so tonight we're going to spend, and by the way, how long are we meeting tonight? Is it an hour? Did we do an hour? Did we say?
We didn't say, but maybe 30 minutes, is that enough?
Yeah, 8:50, a little after 8 or so.
Yeah.
Let's see how far we get. So, the first place we're going on our trip is called Caesarea Maritima. Now, in the Bible, it's never called Maritima, it's just called Caesarea. As opposed to Caesarea Philippi, which was the hometown of Peter, which we're also going to. That's on the Sea of Galilee. This is the port city, and it's called Caesarea Maritima. And we're going there, and there's 3 important people that you want to think about with Caesarea Maritima. And here they are. Let's say them together. Herod the Great, say it with me. Herod the Great, Pontius Pilate, and Paul. That's right. So HPP. When you think of Caesarea Maritima, HPP. Herod the Great, Pontius Pilate, and Paul. There's where Caesarea is. You can see the Sea of Galilee is actually above your map there. This is the Jordan River coming up there. Dead Sea here. Jerusalem is here. Antipatris is a place that's mentioned in Acts. We're going to do some study of the Bible here in a minute. And Paul goes up to Caesarea. People are coming down from Caesarea all the time because this is the main seaport for Palestine in Jesus' day. So people are coming in and out of there all the time.
Where's Haifa in relationship to that?
It's right up there by it. I can't remember if it's before. I know Jaffa is down here, and I'm thinking Haifa's up there too, but I don't know. So here's a few. Now, and I thought I had this on your handout. So Debbie asked last time we met, about a reading suggestion, a historical book or whatever. Herod the Great is somebody, and the Herods, and we'll go over all of this I'm not doing it tonight exactly, because Herod's Masada, Herod's Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Herod is certainly Caesarea Maritima. Herod's all over the place. So you're going to be learning a lot about Herod the Great. This is a new book. This guy's a Jewish guy, and I can't wait to read it. It's just come out. It's in paperback now. You can order it on Amazon. I think it's a little pricey. I think it's like $35. That was when I saw it. Man, that's an expensive book. I've ordered it for my computer, and it's under development, so it should probably be done in a couple months. But I am really excited about this book because he goes into, when you read about Herod the Great, you're learning about Roman history of the time, about the Caesars, about I mean, this is the best window into the whole history of the time of Jesus. Herod lived before Jesus and died not too many years after he was born. And then he had 4 sons. Well, he had lots of sons. He killed some of them, numbers of them, which was normal in the way at that time almost. I mean, it was a pretty ugly world there. And so he put his 4 sons, or the 4 sons got 4 parts of the Holy Land, and so we will have to learn about them. And then we're going to hear tonight about Herod Agrippa. That was a grandson of Herod the Great. So you learn about Roman governance, Roman politics that affected the Holy Land. You learn about Herod the Great because he built the Temple Mount, and he's such an important figure. And everything, you see, you still to this day see the effects of Herod the Great all over the place. Certainly when we go to Masada, he's the one that created Masada as a fortress that the Jewish folks hid out in when the revolt happened in, I think it's, 74 AD that they conquered Masada, something like the Romans did. But anyway, so I just think, Debbie, if you like history, this is a great book. And I want to read it. I haven't read it, but I've listened to the guy, like it's Erdman's, so this is his name, and it's Erdman's is the publisher, and they have a thing on YouTube. If you actually YouTube his name and the book, you can listen to the author talking about the book. So anyway, so I wanted to get you that info. So this is what they estimate the harbor that Herod the Great built in Caesarea Maritima. This is not in existence anymore. The sea has destroyed it over the many, many years. But this is what they've dived, they've done archaeology, and they've roughly traced out the remains of where it was. It was the biggest harbor in the, I think, the Mediterranean at the time. And Herod the Great built it. He also, and so this is kind of what the thing looks like now. You can imagine it goes way out. It would have gone way out. This is just some of the remnants. He also built, what do you call it? Something drone? Something drone? It's the chariot racing? Hippodrome. Thank you, Kevin.
Made for horse?
Yes, yeah, made for horses. So the whole chariots, this is still there. You're going to walk from one end of that to the other as you walk through Caesarea Philippi. This is Herod's palace. Out beyond that is, and you're going to get to stand right there. Beyond that is the swimming pool that he made in the ocean. You got to see that. I'm going to come back to this in a minute because the Pontius Pilate stone, they call this Pontius Pilate stone. This stone was found in Caesarea Maritima, faced it with the writing down. It had been reused for something. And that's why it preserved the writing, and the writing is Pontius Pilate, it's not prefect, but procreator of Judea. So we have actual, archaeological evidence for the existence of Pilate. So if anybody thinks, oh, the biblical story just kind of made up, no, this is found, so we know Pontius Pilate existed. I'm going to play for you a little clip from a class, an archaeology class I have online, about Pontius Pilate in just a minute if we have time. So we'll come back to that. Question?
Yeah, do they have any replica vessels there so you get a picture of what was traversing that harbor?
I think they have pictures there's a little museum there. I think I recall seeing some pictures. What a typical, ship-size vessel would have been like. Of course, this also is in Caesarea Maritima. This is the aqueduct that Herod built to bring fresh water to Caesarea Maritima. I think hundreds of miles? I don't know. I forget how far the aqueduct is. And if you know, how many of you are engineers here? We got 1, 2, 3 few. Just imagine, how precise that has to be to have just a slight downhill over hundreds of miles.
Quarter-inch to the foot.
Quarter-inch to the foot, or probably less. I mean, to get that far. I don't know. So you'll get to go there and maybe even swim in the ocean there. Mediterranean's really nice. Okay, so now let's study the Bible. So why is this significant? we'll talk about Pontius Pilate in a minute. Herod, we're going to talk more about later, but Herod basically built Caesarea Maritima. It was awarded to him, and we'll go over that. And so he built Caesarea Maritima. But, of course, the most important thing, and why it's important, is because it is the place that's mentioned a ton of times in the book of Acts. So on your piece of paper here that I gave you, on one side is, it's just in the book of Acts, Caesarea, all the different places that it's mentioned. We're not going to go over all of those, but you'll notice that we, like for instance in Acts 8, where it first shows up there on the one side, but Philip found himself in Azotus, and as he was passing through the region, he proclaimed good news to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. That's here. This is the seaport. When the believers learned of it, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. That's Paul. And so again, Paul's headed off into the Mediterranean somewhere, into Asia Minor. If he's not walking, he's sailing, and this is where he sails out. The famous centurion, Cornelius, was in Caesarea. We hear that in Acts 10:24, the following day when they came to Caesarea, Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. And so we start to see that a thriving church starts to happen in Caesarea. Let's see, down to 12:19. When Herod had searched for him and could not find him, he examined the guards and ordered them to be put. This is Peter, when Peter was in prison. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. When he was in prison where Herod was, then they send Peter down to Caesarea, and he hangs out in Caesarea. Acts 18, when he landed in Caesarea, he went up to Jerusalem and greeted the church and went down to Antioch. I'm pretty sure that's Paul. But the part that I really want to get to tonight is in Acts 21. And so, I've got this, let me just pull it up here. In the future for our meetings, if you can bring your Bibles, that is a great thing. But for tonight, I'm going to help you out up here. So I want to set this up, this occurrence of Caesarea, and if we go back up here to 16, after these days we got ready to start to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of this Manason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to stay. So what we get from the book of Acts is that in Caesarea Maritima, there was early on a pretty thriving Christian community there, as we hear that some of the disciples from Caesarea also came to Jerusalem. So now Paul visits Jerusalem, he preaches the gospel, and he gets in a lot of trouble. So I want you to hear about his arrest, because that sets up what we're doing in Caesarea Maritima. I'm just going to say Caesarea. When I mean Caesarea Philippi, I'll just say that. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, who had seen him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law in this place. More than that, he has actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." That's uncircumcised people. For they had previously seen Trophimus and the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. So Acts says he didn't actually bring him. Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in uproar. Okay, so this is the Romans now. So we got Romans and Jewish folks, authorities interacting. Immediately he took soldiers and centurions, ran down to them. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. There we go. Then the tribune came, arrested him, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was, and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, another, and he could not learn the facts because of the uproar. He ordered him to be brought to the barracks. When Paul came to the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. Can you imagine him being carried, because the people were so angry at what he was preaching. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him." So Paul defends himself and says, he gets to make a speech. And so, because at this point the Romans are like, what is going on with this guy? I am a Jew from Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of an important city, and I beg you, let me speak to the people. So he asks, to the Roman authorities, the soldiers, let me speak. And so he's given permission, and so he stands up and he gives his testimony, if you will. He'll talk about the resurrection, and he talks about Jesus, and he even quotes some things that Jesus had told him directly. This is where he was struck down on the road to Damascus. So he tells his story and he makes his case. It's pretty amazing. So he gets to preach through all this hubbub and commotion. So then we get to hear here at 17, after I had returned to Jerusalem, and while I was praying in the temple, I fell in a trance and saw Jesus saying to me, "Hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me." So now he says that Jesus spoke to him directly, and that bottom line, he's going to send him to the Gentiles. So at this point, everybody listens to him, then they freak out. They don't want that. And then something interesting happens here. The tribune answered, it cost, let's go a little bit further. But when they had tied him up with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who is uncondemned?" So the Roman guy, I'm just going to deal with this. We'll flog him, we'll let him go, and we'll be done with this thing. And he flogs, and then he finds out he's just broken the law. He has flogged a Roman citizen, because Paul was a Roman citizen. They didn't know that. So this is a big concern. When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? This man is a Roman citizen." The tribune came and asked Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" He said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "It cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship." Paul said, "But I was born a citizen." Immediately, those who were about to examine him drew back from him. They're afraid now. They're afraid of the Romans and even the Romans. We've broken our own laws. The tribune was also afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that they had bound him. So now he's brought before the council. I'm going to kind of move on because I want to keep going. There's a plot to kill Paul, even though he's in the hands of the Romans now. Let's keep going down here. And again, you can come back to, start reading in verse 21 and go all the way to chapter 21, go to chapter 26. But then we hear this. Then he summoned two of the centurions and said, "Get ready to leave by 9 o'clock, because there's this revolt. They're going to kill Paul, even though he's under the protection of the Roman, imprisonment, but protection of the Romans. We're going by 9 o'clock tonight for Caesarea with 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen." Now that's a lot. That is a lot of soldiers for one guy. So they're afraid that Paul is going to be murdered, and he's a Roman citizen. So now they have to protect him. And off they go. And they send a letter to Felix, the governor of that particular area. He wrote this letter to the effect. And then we get the basic, here's Paul, here's the letter. And so then he ordered that he be kept under guard in Herod's praetorium, or headquarters. Now, let me go back to my slide, because you're going to get to stand. You're going to get to stand right there. See this right there? That is where here, and then it's a little bit more off to the side here, is where Herod's praetorium was. That's the exact spot that Paul was held in prison. So you're going to go there and stand there. Maybe we'll get all in prison. But there are no bars or anything anymore. But it's actually the place where he was. So he's kept under guard in Herod's headquarters. So then we have Paul before Felix at Caesarea. And 5 days later, a high priest Ananias, so the high priest is the guy in charge of the Jerusalem temple. So he comes down with some elders, an attorney, a certain Tertullius. So Tertullius is the prosecuting attorney. And they reported their case against Paul to the governor. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullius began to accuse him, saying, "Your Excellency, because of you, we have long enjoyed peace." So he's going to flatter the Roman guy. "We have, in fact, found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes." That's what those who were following Jesus of Nazareth were called sometimes. "He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him concerning everything which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in the charge by asserting that all this was true. So now Paul is before Felix. When the governor mentioned to him to speak, Paul replied, "I cheerfully make my defense, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation. As you can find out, it's not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd either in the synagogues or throughout the city. Neither can they prove to you that the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way," this is the earliest description of what Christians were called, people of the way, "which they call a sect, I worship the God of our ancestors." Now this is important just from a theological thing. The God who raised Jesus from the dead is the God of Israel. This is really important that Paul affirms that. "Believing everything laid down according to the law and written in the prophets, I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous." So the Pharisees, a big part of Judaism of the time, probably the most powerful part of Judaism, believed in a resurrection. There was one group, the Sadducees, did not. But therefore, so I'm talking about the resurrection. They already believe in a resurrection. We have this hope. "Therefore, I do my best always to have a clear conscience towards God and all people. Now, after some years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices." Paul had delivered he would go around and bring help for Jerusalem. "While I was doing this, they found me in the temple, completing the rite of purification without any crowd or disturbance. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation, if they have anything against me." "Or let these men here tell what crime they have found when I stood before the council, unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them. It is about the resurrection of the dead that I am trial before you today." So this is what Paul is asserting is on trial, is his position about Jesus as one raised from the dead. But Felix, who was rather well informed about the way, that's interesting, adjourned the hearing with the comment, when Lysias the tribune comes down, "I will decide your case." Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but let him have some liberty, and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. So Felix says, "We're just going to keep him in there. I'm going to wait before I make a decision." But he keeps Paul in jail, but Paul can have people come and go. So that's good news for Paul, because he's a great evangelist from jail. I mean, it's like perfect, So right there in Caesarea, where you're going to get to see, is where he was in prison. It goes on and on here. If I remember right, let's just keep reading. We have time. Okay, so some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him speak concerning faith in Christ Jesus. And as he discussed justice, or righteousness is the word there, self-control and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present. When I have an opportunity, I will send for you." So it's like, this is too scary what this guy's talking about. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, and for that reason he used to send for him very often and converse with him. Is that like a bribe? Like, I'll keep you in it. When are you going to give me the bribe? After how many years? 2 years passed. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. And since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix So after 2 years, there's a transition to Festus, but before Felix finishes, he still leaves him in prison because he wants to keep the Jewish folks happy. This is according to the author of the book of Acts. Okay. So then, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested as a favor to them against Paul to have him transferred to Jerusalem. We want to get him to Jerusalem, we can take care of him there. They were in fact planning to ambush and to kill him along the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he's not in Caesarea, but he's going to keep him there. So he said, let those of you who have authority come down with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. Let's give this guy a fair trial after 2 years or whatever. After he had stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day he took his seat in the tribunal, which would have been right there, you know, in Herod's palace, somewhere right in there, ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, now we got Festus. Now what do you, yeah, we'll stop here and we'll ask a question. Ask Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? And Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. So bottom line, what happens is while Festus, what's the dynamic you get between the Roman authority and the Jewish authorities? What's the Roman authorities' view of the Jewish folks? They want to keep them what? Happy.
Appeased.
Appeased. They don't want trouble. Paul's in the middle. So when you go to the Holy Land, you're going to see the Roman and the Jewish. When we go to the Sea of Galilee, you're going to see that there was a Roman Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee and a Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. These are the two big parts of the world at the time of Jesus. And it's just, you've got to get that dynamic. The Roman authorities don't want revolt. And they know things are heating up. You know, they don't want problems. So bottom line, what happens here is here, and why, and this is the finish on Caesarea as far as Paul goes. Paul says, as a Roman citizen, you know, this has gone on long enough. I appeal to Caesar. That was a required thing. Now he has to be sent where? Where's Caesar? In Rome. What's Paul thinking? That's where I want to go. His hope was to go to Rome and then go to Spain. That was his hope. So he appeals. Later on, Festus will say, you know, if he wouldn't, I don't see that he did anything wrong. If he wouldn't appeal to Caesar, I'd have let him go. Paul says, well, that wasn't.
It's easy to say afterwards.
It's easy to say afterwards. But as it turns out, this is like, Paul's like, this is the way I can get to Rome. And so that's towards the end of the book of Acts. All of that in Caesarea Maritima. It's a really cool place to go. It's beautiful. And yeah. Now, I said Herod, which we're going to talk more about, Pontius Pilate. Can we do 10 minutes more? 5 minutes after 8? Can you give me 10 more minutes? Okay, because I want to show you.
Can we say that? No.
Yeah, like what? No, Pastor Bill, no. I want to show you a little bit about that Pilate stone, because this is really cool.
Now, in the previous lecture, we looked at how
I'll pause
Philo of Alexandria in Egypt
Seconds.
regarded Pontius Pilate, the governor of Samaria and Judea. And we looked at how Josephus summed him up.
I am going to give you information on those two people. These are other two people that you're going to want to know, Josephus and Philo. Philo was a Jewish philosopher in Egypt, in Alexandria. Josephus is a Jewish historian who tells of the Romans' destruction of the temple in 70 AD. I'll give you his whole life story and stuff. So these are two historians, two extra-biblical, outside of the Bible sources that talk about Pontius Pilate. Okay? So this is what he's talking about. And their estimate of Pontius Pilate was very negative. Like, this guy's the ruthless, most horrible person ever. Worse than he's portrayed in the Gospels. If you haven't read those, and we'll look at those.
Pilate, of course, really piles it on, suggesting that Pilate was corrupt, that he was violent, he had no regard for law and justice, he was more than happy to execute people, and so on. Josephus suggested that the man was insensitive and didn't care about Jewish customs and that sort of thing. And then when we come to the Gospels, all four of them in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Pilate doesn't seem to come across quite that way. Pilate seems somewhat uncertain, hesitating, even reluctant to execute Jesus. He wants to know why he should do this. And so some critical scholars think that the Gospels are basically whitewashing Pilate, that they're portraying Pilate in sympathetic terms. It's all part of an apologetic strategy. And so they prefer then the portraits of Pilate given by Philo and Josephus and over the portraits of the New Testament Gospels, suggesting that the New Testament Gospels are unhistorical or at best have grossly distorted the way it actually was. Well, I challenge that. We have a very heavy axe to grind in Philo. We need to recognize that. He has a reason for piling on the criticism on Pontius Pilate. Josephus, too, has his own reasons for portraying Pilate and other Roman governors in a negative light. But what we have in the Gospels is a governor who is not overly interested in Jewish affairs, a governor who doesn't live in Jerusalem. He visits Jerusalem from time to time, usually because of the big holidays, like Passover. But the governor lives in Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean Sea. And what we're going to look at is evidence that Pontius Pilate was far more concerned with rebuilding the city, remodeling it, giving it a facelift and an upgrade to the harbor and to the facilities that relate to shipping in Caesarea Maritima. Far more concerned with that than he is with what's going on in Jerusalem. In fact, I sometimes say that Pilate is westward facing. He's facing Rome. That's his future, that's his ambition. Not being governor of Judea, so his back is on Jerusalem, he's facing Rome. So how does this, how do we resolve this tension then? Is there actually evidence that the gospel portrait of Pilate, where he's not ready to just acquiesce to the ruling priest demands, that Pilate really recognizes what's going on? Jesus has insulted and embarrassed the ruling priest. They want to take it out on him, have him executed. Pilate is not real sure that he wants to execute a popular preacher on the eve of Passover, just outside the gates of Jerusalem, and possibly provoke the crowd. So Pilate's reluctance is understandable, not because of a commitment to mercy or justice, or not because he's necessarily impressed with Jesus, but because why does he want to inflame the Jewish public? Simply because the ruling priests have become annoyed. So you keep that in mind. So I think a critical reading of both the Gospels and Philo and Josephus, I think we can start seeing what really is going on. Well, now let's begin then with an archaeological discovery. We start with Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian writing in Latin at the beginning of the 2nd century, sometime around 110 or 112 AD. And what does he say? Well, he's talking about where the Christian movement came from, where it got its name. And so he talks about Christ, who was put to death by the procurator, Pontius Pilate. And he gives him the title procurator. Now, that is what the Roman...
I'm going to pause this there. Did you know that there's a Roman historian who mentions Christianity in 110?
Usually just named Tacitus, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And evidently I don't know where they get the Cornelius. They must have other other sources for that. But I think that's interesting. And so Pilate is mentioned by this guy, but the title is procurator, and this is significant. So hang in there just a couple more minutes.
When governors were called, beginning in the year 44, after Herod Agrippa had died, in 44 Roman governors ruled the whole for a short while his grandson, Herod Agrippa, ruled. In other words, not just Samaria and Judea in the south, but also Galilee and Gaulonitis in the north. They were procurators. And so, was Pontius Pilate a procurator when he was governor of Judea and Samaria? Well, a remarkable discovery answers that question. Now, curiously enough, coincidentally enough, in 1960, the great British historian and classicist, Professor A.H.M. Jones, published an essay indicating that on the basis of his research, Pontius Pilate wasn't a procurator at all, as Tacitus said, but rather a prefect. Well, that's just one of those happy things. The very next year, while doing excavations at the theater at Caesarea Maritima, the stone was uncovered. And the stone, the beautiful stone, unfortunately on the left side of it chipped away. Fortunately, the stone placed face down when it was reused, thus protecting the rest of the inscription on the right. The inscription identified Pontius Pilate as Pontius or Pontius Pilatus Prefectus Judaea. Pontius Pilate, prefect or governor of Judea. Now this inscription does two things. Not only does it confirm what his true rank was, he's a prefect, not a more exalted form of governor, a procurator, but it also was an indication of his rebuilding and remodeling program over a period of at least 10 years at Caesarea Maritima. And so this is important evidence that indeed he was preoccupied with building activities at Caesarea Maritima. And he wasn't that concerned about what was going on in Jerusalem.
Oh, stop it there. So why did you listen to that? Why did they find the stone in Caesarea Maritima? That was Pontius Pilate's home. He didn't live in Jerusalem. How many of you thought he lived in Jerusalem as like a, or he was in that? No, he visited that area to deal with issues. And so what this person is saying, Pontius Pilate was more concerned about re-upping what Herod the Great had built in this great thing, because he was looking towards Rome. That was his ambition, not some backwater little Judea. So that's a problem. And so, anyway, so when you think of Caesarea Maritima now, your first visit on your trip, Herod the Great built it. Pontius Pilate, that was his home. That was where the guy that put Jesus to death, that's where he lived. We found this stone. And then this is where Paul was imprisoned all those years, and the launch pad for Christianity into Asia Minor and Rome. And then now also, Pontius Pilate. So now you've got those in your head, right? You'll remember in a few months. All right. Okay. Any other comments, and we'll adjourn for tonight?
Yeah, just the title of prefect, before that in the army of the imperial Rome, was praetor.
Praetor. So we need to get some definitions.
Yeah,
Yes, we need to get prefector, procurator. Could you?
There was three different army transitions: the ancient army, the imperial army, and the army of the republic, based on the spread of the imperial and then the.
Yeah. So you have a homework assignment.
Okay.
To get us those titles, so we really have those distinctions. Yes, Debbie.
Are we about?
Yeah, we're just about done.
Well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that my son is at Goodwill. It's called Arabs in Israel. Did you get my email?
yeah. Well,
Is
I
this,
was having Comcast problems, so.
is this appropriate to share?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can get it on Amazon for a penny plus $3.99
Shipping.
shipping. And it's real easy to read. It has maps. It has short chapters. And I'm not saying that this is, I'm not giving an evaluation of it.
Have you read it?
I've read part of it. I've been working on it.
Yeah, working on it.
Filled with great, because the last time we met, we were talking about the Arab-Israeli.
Jewish. Yes, tensions.
How to,
Tensions. Yes. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
For $4.
Yep.
Arabs in Israel for Beginners by Ron David. And it looks like it's a series of things. It's called Writers and Readers. What year was it?
Cool. Thank you, Debbie. Very excited.
Ron David. So,
It's probably Jewish.
yeah.
Yeah,
sounds
Father.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm always interested in those and seeing, what is their perspective and is it balanced? And hey, more the merrier. I think that's great. This is a classic by H.V. Morton, In the Steps of the Master. And Mike and Pavers let me borrow this. So I'll let you know. I'm just starting to work through it. So Steps of the Master is a classic. I think it's still in print somewhere. It probably isn't very much. By H.V. Morton, M-O-R-T-O-N, In Steps of the Master. It is by DeCapo Press. So I haven't looked to see if it's available or not. But that Herod book, I'm going to read that right away because I think that if you're a history buff, I think you're going to really love it. Okay, anything else? Trip coordinator Julie? Let's thank Julie again for making this all happen. But are you good? Other than that, as far as details, we're all...
Next meeting is Tuesday, November 15th.
Let me apologize to the mandate people. I got somebody else doing mandate tonight. It just was impossible to make it all happen. And then the next mandate is scheduled to be, by the way, on election night. So I'm not sure what we're going to do. Anyway, so with that, hey, just remember that Paul says in Ephesians that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. So just remember, this is an incredible spiritual journey that's going to really bless your faith life. It's going to make your faith more concrete. There's nothing like getting to the land. And I'm sure since that's true that the old tempter, the old adversary, might like to throw a few monkey wrenches in our way. So let's pray that nothing gets in our way that way and that God keeps us together. Okay, so let's pray. Thank you, God, for this night. Thank you for this great group of folks and this amazing sojourn that we're looking forward to. Do protect us from the evil one. Save us from the time of trial indeed. And watch over our preparations, our going out and our coming in, and all those who are getting ready for our trip already. So give us your Holy Spirit, God, and guide us along the way. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you, guys. Oh yes, if you want to put up your chair, that's great. That would be helpful. I appreciate it.
We have extra copies of the agenda. Was there any extra copies of your...
Oh, if you want some more, you don't get it yet because I want to read it. If you get the National Geographic, or you want to go buy it in some, I don't know if they still have this one.
This one's at Barnes & Noble.
This is at the Barnes & Noble. Herod the First. That's Herod the Great. And they have a whole spread on Herod the Great.